Building a home from the ground up is a monumental achievement, one that many dream of, but let me share how. Just as we were about to enjoy the fruits of that dream, my marriage began to unravel. I'm Abigail, 30 years old, married to Gary, who's 35, and together we have a daughter, Sarah, who's 3. We decided to build our dream house, expecting happiness and smooth sailing. Most would assume everything was perfect, but for me, it was far from it. The combination of our ongoing house project and mounting issues with my in-laws has left me constantly anxious. Our first sign of trouble occurred one morning when we decided to leave Sarah at my in-laws' place. Both Gary and I work, and our weekdays are packed with tasks. We typically spend weekends hunting for materials or discussing house plans. When Sarah came along, she would often get bored and restless, so we usually left her with my parents, who live nearby. But on that particular morning, my father had fallen and needed medical attention, so he couldn't watch Sarah. I thought we should cancel our plans, but Gary suggested, why not leave her at my parents' house? I don't have a good relationship with my in-laws. They don't respect me as their son's wife and seem to think they can say whatever they want. It's frustrating. I felt uneasy asking them to look after a 3-year-old, but if we postponed our plans, it would set back the house project. So, reluctantly, we left Sarah with them for the day. After finishing our tasks, we stopped to buy some fancy pastries as a thank you and headed over to my in-laws' house. That evening, they seemed in a good mood, perhaps because of the pastries. Sarah, on the way out, asked, "Where is Grandpa and Grandma's room in our new house?" I was taken aback. "Sweetie, what do you mean? Did Grandpa and Grandma ask you about that? What did you tell them?" "I told them I didn't know," she answered, then returned to her conversation with her stuffed penguin. "Sarah calls my parents Granddad and Granny, so Grandpa and Grandma must be Gary's parents. Maybe they were wondering if there was a guest room for them in our new home. At least, that was my assumption at the time." After that day, my in-laws began visiting frequently, especially during weekdays or holidays when we were home. Currently, we're living in a small, outdated apartment to save money for the house. Each time they came over, they'd immediately sit down, asking to see the house plans. Before I could protest, Gary would eagerly share everything with them. Why does he do this every time? It's exhausting. Their visits became routine, and soon, my mother-in-law began interrogating me about the house. It felt like a hearing. With me under intense scrutiny, she'd examine the plans, criticizing the kitchen layout and insisting we needed more guest rooms. She even joked about the country's declining birth rate, strangely not asking for my input on it. I'd respond calmly, based on what we've already decided and the plans in motion. It's too late to change things now. But my frustration only deepened as she continued to ask questions about furniture and appliances. She always acted like she was an expert on home design, declaring, "I've visited many homes and seen different layouts. From that experience, I can tell this house doesn't feel right. It has bad vibes, so things won't go smoothly." She was just my mother-in-law, yet she spoke as if she were an authority. I joked, what if we made it a multi-generational home and split the costs? But they didn't find it funny. "Are you asking for money? A multi-generational home? That sounds terrible," they retorted. That day, they left in a huff. "You're not my real parents, and I owe you no respect," I muttered to myself. Later that night, after putting Sarah to bed, Gary came to me, frustrated. "My parents mean well. Don't be so cold to them." "I don't mean to be cold, but isn't it rude how they constantly interfere with our decisions? It feels like they look down on me as just their daughter-in-law," I replied. "They're just being parents. You can't dismiss their advice like that. Don't you see how disrespectful that is?" I tried to explain. "They haven't helped us financially. They contribute nothing, yet they have so much to say. It feels unfair." Gary urged me to calm down, but I was boiling with anger, unable to sleep. Finally, after much anticipation, our house was complete. Just as we were moving in, something unexpected happened. "My parents are moving in today. Dad can take the bigger room upstairs, and Mom will be fine in the smaller one." "Wait a minute. What's going on? We agreed the upstairs rooms were for Sarah." "I didn't hear anything about this," I protested. "What if your parents don't like the rooms?" Gary responded nonchalantly. "They checked out the rooms yesterday. It's no big deal." "It's not a big deal?" I was furious. This is a huge deal. I stormed out of the kitchen and locked myself in a room to clear my mind, needing time away to process my thoughts. As I packed up, the thought of my in-laws moving in made me feel utterly fed up with Gary and his parents. I didn't want to share a space with them, but we had invested too much in this house. I needed to think clearly. What should I say? What should I let slide? For the sake of Sarah and myself? Downstairs, I overheard them grumbling about how nothing was unpacked and how slow we were. Finally, I gathered the courage to face them. "Excuse me, I wasn't informed about this living arrangement," I said coldly. My father-in-law shot back. "I told Gary. That should be enough." "No, it's not," I replied. "This morning was the first I heard about it. I have no intention of living with you, especially after all the disrespect." Gary's father snapped. "You think you can defy us like this? Such a presumptuous daughter-in-law. If you don't like it, leave. This is hopeless. We've never communicated properly," I muttered under my breath. Gary rushed over, asking, "What's going on, Abigail? Why are you arguing with my parents?" "This isn't just an argument. I'm being criticized for being your daughter-in-law, and now you're blaming me too," I retorted. I realized then, Gary was just like his father. Like father, like son. "Gary, I can't live with your parents." "Why not? Why are you making this so difficult for me?" he demanded. "Because I'm my own person. You can't force me to live under these conditions," I replied firmly. Hearing this, Gary's father shouted, "We don't need a daughter-in-law like you." Gary then said, "Maybe you're right. If you can't respect my parents, maybe we should get a divorce." I had been waiting for this. "All right, let's get a divorce then," I said, my voice steady. He had asked for it, and now, I was simply agreeing. As I stood there, I hoped my phone was recording the entire conversation. "I'm going to move forward, as we'll be strangers from now on. Please repay the $350,000 I lent you for the construction of this house." His parents stared at me in shock, utterly confused. Gary's face drained of color as he stared at me. I calmly addressed his stunned parents, saying, "There seems to be some misunderstanding. Gary didn't contribute a single cent to this house. I used my savings because he didn't have any. We both worked and shared our living expenses equally. The plan was for us to save separately, but he spent his money instead." "Enough, Abigail," Gary snapped. "It's the truth," I continued. "When we bought the house, Gary insisted it be in his name. That's why I lent him the money, and we have a written agreement to back it up." "That's impossible," Gary protested, ignoring the disbelief on their faces. He quickly packed up essential items, my daughter's toys and clothes, into bags. I carried her favorite stuffed penguin and loaded everything into my compact car. I drove off, saying goodbye to the house that had briefly been our home. After picking up my daughter from daycare, we headed to my parents' place in Nebraska. They were casually dressed and surprised to see me with so much luggage. "This is unexpected, and I understand it might be an inconvenience. If it's too much trouble, I can stay at a motel," I said hesitantly. They reassured me it was fine. Later, I learned they had been concerned about my well-being, fearing I might harm myself or my daughter. Although I had promised to protect her, I explained everything to them, why I was divorcing Gary and my intention to raise our daughter alone. They assured me of their full support and suggested I stay with them for a while, which was a relief. Since I was working that night, I made sure to document everything that happened between Gary, his parents, and me. I saved audio recordings of our conversations on my computer and external drive. Armed with this evidence, I visited several law firms until I found a trustworthy lawyer and officially hired them. A week passed quickly since I left the house, filled with the usual demands of daily life. One evening, after work, I was surprised to find someone waiting for me. It was my husband, well, ex-husband, technically still my husband until the divorce was finalized. I had no intention of speaking with him, but his potential aggression left me on edge. So I suggested we go somewhere public. He agreed, and we entered a coffee shop. I made sure to activate my phone's recorder just in case. Trying to remain calm, I asked, "Do you need to talk?" "Yes, about the house. I'll transfer the deed to you and change the ownership. Can we call the money issue resolved?" "I'm sorry, but I can't live in that house anymore, especially after your parents were there before us." "Why does that matter?" It matters to me. So the answer is no, I replied firmly, sipping my coffee while studying my ex-husband. His hair was messy, some of it sticking out, and he had a stubbled chin. Despite his suit, his shirt was wrinkled, like it hadn't been ironed or cleaned. I wondered about the life he was leading, but he seemed worn out. Please, Abigail, I can't pay back that much money all at once. You knew it was a big sum when you borrowed it, didn't you? I asked. We could have put both our names on the house, or just mine, but you insisted it be in your name, claiming the house was mine. I thought I owned it. I never planned on divorcing. I figured you knew I was just bluffing. I was serious. I'm done with you, and I'm definitely divorcing you. It's not just your lack of responsibility, but I can't deal with your rude parents either. But I have to go. Sarah is waiting for me. Wait, I'm taking Sarah with me. I froze in fear as my ex-husband's words hit me. When I got back to my parents' house, I warned him to be careful, afraid he might try to take Sarah by force. A few days after that, I was informed my in-laws were at Sarah's daycare. I left work early and rushed there. Fortunately, I had already notified them, so they kept my in-laws in a separate room where they couldn't see Sarah. As soon as I entered the room with my in-laws, they started yelling at me. Give us our granddaughter back, you gold-digging thief. What are you talking about? Thief? I haven't taken anything. If you're not a thief, then you're a con artist. You must have done something shady to have that much money at your age. It doesn't make sense for someone like you to have so much. No, all the money I lent Gary was mine. It's all from my hard work, my savings, and gifts from my parents and grandmother. What gifts? Every year, my parents gave me money to avoid taxes, which went directly into my account, along with some funds from selling stocks. That's where it came from. So that money really was yours? You didn't give any money to Gary as a gift? You can still make gifts, you know, my father-in-law grunted, falling silent. They liked to spend on expensive things, always showing off luxury. As a working-class family without passive income, it was clear they didn't have much saved. They never considered giving money like my parents did. I'm sorry, but I'm divorcing Gary. I'll be keeping custody of Sarah. Please don't come to the daycare again. With that, I quickly loaded Sarah into the car and drove straight to my parents' home. Despite my warnings, Gary and my in-laws kept showing up after that. Each time, I stayed calm and sent them away, but they often grabbed my arm or yelled hurtful things. I made sure to record everything on my phone. About a month later, I sent a letter through my lawyer demanding repayment of debts and a divorce agreement. My ex-husband agreed in principle, but contested custody of Sarah. When I mentioned alimony, his demeanor shifted drastically. He turned pale and became much quieter. Armed with ample evidence against him and knowing he had no savings, I pressed forward with my case. It took some time, but I eventually won custody of Sarah, got back the money I had lent, and finalized the divorce. Getting the debt repayments took longer than expected, as the sale of our house encountered issues. Initially, I fought against Gary and his parents moving in, but they couldn't afford the $350,000. Gary didn't have savings, and even if his parents sold their old home, it wouldn't cover the cost. Eventually, they had to sell the house for less than they paid. After several price reductions, they found a buyer. The difference, along with real estate fees, was borrowed from the bank by my ex-husband. Losing the house and accumulating debt, he moved back with his parents into their old, run-down home. To make things worse, Gary's divorced sister and her 2 teenage sons moved in with them. 6 people crammed into a small, old house. It quickly became known in the neighborhood for constant arguments and tension. Fortunately, they no longer bothered us, struggling to pay child support. It was no surprise he kept a low profile. For years have passed since then. My daughter, Sarah, is now in 2nd grade. We rent a place near my parents, and when I'm late from work, they watch over her. Despite the challenges, we're doing well. I once thought I would remain single, but recently I've started dating someone. He's 36, previously married, and has a daughter in 1st grade. We met through school drop-offs and pickups, and he eventually expressed his feelings. We've been spending time together with our daughters. The other day, Sarah casually said, if we ever build a house, it'd be nice if all 4 of us had our own rooms, and maybe we could get a dog. My heart skipped a beat. In fact, he had proposed to me recently. Since both our daughters come first in our decisions, I haven't given him a definitive answer. But now, I've made my decision. I hugged Sarah tightly and said, "That sounds wonderful. I'd love to build a new home. This time, we'll all discuss it together as a family and make sure it's a place where everyone will be happy." Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Stay stunned.